I really appreciate you listening to the podcast here. Let's go get started. You have no idea what a nerd I am that I get so excited I'm going to record another podcast. So, it's August 8th. Apologize for clearing my throat. It is August 8th. It is day 90. And we are going to spend 2 days, today and tomorrow, talking about the Electoral College. This is really important because it's been in the media a lot. I mean, people are trying to evaluate if it still works. What I want to cover for you today is essentially how it started, what has happened along that journey from our founding fathers to essentially kind of present times. And then some of the issues we're facing. Tomorrow I'll talk about some of the issues we're facing with the Electoral College and what some of the proposals are to possibly modify it. Again, I'm trying to be non-partisan, pro-democracy, because this is what's got me fired up. This is just everybody being excited about elections again, and they're not this deep, dark hole that we all just bow our heads in shame because we just don't want to do this anymore. It's too painful. No. That's why I'm here. I'm here because I'm so fired up. I'm excited that people are excited. People are paying attention. People are deciding they're choosing happiness. They're really looking at hope and planning ahead and thinking forward. Oh my God, I almost exercised. I mean, the optimism is palpable. And that's for all of us. That's for all Americans. America needed this. So here we go. We're just going to talk about the Electoral College in part 1 today. And hopefully this will help you appreciate what some of these issues are and how we are where we are in our democratic process. Okay, so this, let's see. Most Americans have heard of the Electoral College, but they really don't fully understand it. And it's a really important part because it's the Electoral College that chooses our president and vice president. Yeah, you heard me correctly. That's how it gets done. It's through the Electoral College. It is not like in school when we voted for student council and the person with the most votes won. Nope, it's not like that at all. Not at all. It is absolutely that kind of voting on our way in the primaries, in the midterms, all the things that we do along the way. But when it comes to president, we use the Electoral College. Okay, so let's go back to the very beginning. If you need like old-timey music, the birth of the Electoral College. I said birth. The idea of the Electoral College was born during the Constitutional Convention. So we're in Philadelphia. We're having a good time. We're wearing a lot of clothes at a time when it's kind of warm. Philadelphia can get warm in the summer. It's 1787, and there's a lot of debate and uncertainty about the future of the new nation. This is the part that always kills me because I know when the Supreme Court goes and looks at our Constitution to decide if something is constitutional or not, I laugh because I'm like, oh my God, these guys were exhausted. They were trying to figure out how to run a whole new country. As much as I love our Constitution, I know they expected it to be a living, breathing document because there's no way they could know all the things at this time. It's 1787, friends. And by the way, we're trespassing. So, and yeah, we are trespassing. We got here and there were people here already. So, our founding fathers are putting this together. And one of the biggest dilemmas that they faced was how to choose a president of the newly formed United States. But they wanted it to, this is where our aspiration and our commitment to who we would become as a country is that they wanted this voting to work in a way that balanced the diverse interests of the states and safeguarded the young republic from potential tyranny. So this is so important. They wanted to balance diverse interests. So that's kind of common cause, right? What do we have in common? Because we all have other things that we care about. But balance those diverse interests. People get, voices would be heard with a certain amount of equity. It's going to crack you up because these voices are only white men. They're not black men or people of color or women. These are white men. But they still wanted to balance the diverse interests of the states and safeguard the young republic from tyranny. So the delegates were deeply concerned about a direct popular vote leading to mob rule or the election of a demagogue. This is, I mean, really think about this. This is what they were worried about with the direct popular vote. Now, mind you, populations are a lot smaller. At this time, only white men are voting. The diversity and those things have just not been. The diversity at that time was diversity of ideas, diversity around governance, diversity around whether there was a separation between church and state. Those kinds of very fundamental diverse interests were what were in play. Congress, allowing Congress or state legislators to choose the president, raised fears of corruption and too much concentration of power in a central authority. So each option had its pros and cons, meaning an electoral college kind of model or a popular vote model. And the stakes were really high because this is setting the foundation for a system that they hoped would endure for generations, which I think is a high-minded idea, but it's actually how we were founded, and we are the country of high-minded ideas. So the delegates came up with a compromise, and it's what we now call the Electoral College, and it was a way to balance the power between the large and the small states and between the federal government and the states. So you hear this all the time. Federal government laws, federal laws that everybody has to adhere to if you are part of the federated states, which is the United States, or state laws, which usually operate in the absence of a federal law. Now, I can tell you, I can think of one right now because it's a real choke point right now. In the states, many states have legalized marijuana. I know I sound like a broken record, right? But I'm really advocate of marijuana for older people. I cannot stress this enough. It's such a way to help your geezers feel better. But states have legalized marijuana, but the feds haven't yet. So there's a case where if you do something federally, take an airplane, mail a package using our U.S. Postal Service, across state lines, those are federal activities that could face federal charges if you involve cannabis in those behaviors. If you stay within your state, mind your own business, you can do whatever you want as long as it's according to state laws. But the minute you cross over into federal activity, and again, flying, the mail, I think to an extent the internet, those are federal activities and they're federally regulated. So I lost my place because I'm like talking about these two things, but I'm not even sure everybody understands there's a difference. And that's why the president can't come into your state and tell your state what to do unless it's all states. He or she cannot tell just one state what to do. A president has to mandate for all states. That's really important. And it's kind of gotten lost in the last few years. So what they were really worried is that there might be some pitfalls in democracy and they want to protect it against it. So they spent the first few years working out the kinks. And I have some cool stories. So the first few elections, so it's 1797, right? So let's see if we can we're going to try to move our way through it. I'm not taking you through every election. But the first few elections were really straightforward. George Washington was elected as president in 1789. Put that in your memory bank and keep it. I did not realize it was 1789. And he won again in 1792. But then it started to get more complicated after he stepped down. And one of the most notable early things that went wrong occurred in the election of 1800. So that's when so okay, it was all good from 1787 to 1800 because we had one president, George Washington, and there just was no problem. But suddenly there was a problem between Thomas Jefferson and John Adams, and the election ended in a tie between Jefferson and his running mate, Aaron Burr. There's a peanut butter commercial out there somewhere about Aaron Burr. I wish I could remember it. The decision was thrown to the House of Representatives, which chose Jefferson. So there was a tie. The Electoral College literally had a tie. Somebody should have counted for odds and evens. But they didn't know how to solve it, so they threw it to the House of Representatives, which chose Jefferson after, wait for it, 36 ballots. And you thought trying to get McCarthy as the House Speaker was hard. How many votes was that? 19? 36 ballots to get Jefferson to affirm Jefferson as our president. This election highlighted a significant flaw in the original design because, if you'll remember this from another podcast we did, you were required to cast 2 votes, both for different candidates. You didn't choose a president and a vice president. You chose 2 people that you wanted to be the leaders. And then they looked at the votes for all the people. So we've got 30 people running for office. Let me lower this number down. 10 people running for office. You get to pick 2. You don't get to say which office you want them to have. You just get to pick 2. The person who gets the most votes out of the pick 2 is who ends up being president. And the problem is the candidate who received the most votes, it didn't matter if there were opposing political parties. So this led to some unintended outcomes, because in 1800, the tie was forced to the House of Representatives. But then we have some situations where we had people from different parties leading in office. And that was a problem, because essentially a vice president and a president who were from different parties were not as effective as a pair that were from the same party. So the system was quickly changed with the 12th Amendment in 1804. So before the next election even hit, they wanted to prevent future conflicts. So you couldn't vote for people from two different parties and have them be opposed to each other in office. So in 1804, we have this 12th Amendment gets rid of these conflicts. And now the vice president and the presidents will come from the same party. And this actually clarified the roles and prevented a lot of electoral disputes going forward. So it was a very good move. But now we have this country. It's growing. We're starting to thrive. We're going to fast forward a little bit, because we have the issue of slavery. And I swear to God, I don't think I understood this till today. I knew about the 3/5 compromise. It's probably one of the most troubling aspects of the Electoral College's history, especially under the broader framework of how we run our political system, because the very notion of 3/5 compromise means somehow we decided humans were only worth 3/5 representation. But let me just be clear about this. Under the compromise, enslaved Black people were counted as 3/5. I can't say this. I have Invisalign. 3/5 is going to be a hard thing. Anyway, they were counted as 3/5 of a person to determine the state's representation in Congress. So get this. Black slaves, they count as 3/5 of a person. So if you are a slave owner, you get to now put in your little bag 3/5 of a vote for every slave that you have. This dehumanizing formula didn't grant any rights or recognition to the slaves themselves. So these individuals counted as 3/5 of a person, but not in their own self-interest, not for their own self-interest. That was essentially for their slave owner. And this ridiculous compromise served to increase the political power of slaveholding states without granting any actual representation to the people who were enslaved. So that you just got to, I didn't know that. I don't know why I didn't know that. But then there's a lot we don't know. We just there's just so much we don't know. So they couldn't vote, and the slave owners got more influence and power. It's important to understand, I'll say this again, the enslaved people did not have a right to vote, nor were they part of the electorate. The white slaveholders entirely controlled the political power generated by counting them this way. This means the additional representation and electoral votes given to the southern states were used by those who owned slaves and used it to maintain and protect the institution of slavery, not represent the interests or rights of the enslaved people themselves. In effect, this compromise allows slaveholding states to gain more seats in the House of Representatives. Guys, I'm going to flag this because this has affected where we are today. Slaveholding states gained more seats in the House of Representatives and more influence in presidential elections without giving any political power or rights to the enslaved population. This actually managed to further entrench slavery because the power that was associated with it. It's so bad. So the 3/5 compromise is a stark reminder of the exploitation of enslaved people. And we're going to wait until they get the right to vote, because next, mind you, half the population still can't vote. That's right. Women can't either. And women's suffrage then emerges in history. And with the 3/5 compromise highlighting the deep flaws about representation, it became one of the most significant battles in history. And suffrage, simply put, is the rights of individuals to participate in our democratic process by casting their vote. So suffrage, when you hear women's suffrage, it just means women's right to vote. I don't know why we have to use a weird word like suffrage instead of women's right to vote, but here's where we are. So initially, the right to vote was restricted to white male property owners. And you could actually, there's whole books written about this. But a lot of us in the population, women, Black people, Native Americans, those without properties, were not allowed to vote. Suffrage was a hard fought process. And the 15th Amendment, the women's right to vote, was ratified in 1870. It prohibited the denial of the right to vote based on race, color, or previous condition of servitude. But it didn't immediately result in widespread voting rights for Blacks, especially in the South where discrimination was still fierce, with like literacy tests, poll taxes, meaning if you don't pay all your fines and everything, you can't vote, and violence. Of course, let's just go for the overt violence against Black voters. The women's suffrage ratification was the 19th Amendment. So the 12th Amendment, the 15th Amendment was the expansion of suffrage. So the expansion of the right to vote. And the 19th Amendment said women had the right to vote. I can't stand it. It's 1920. 1920, people. It's barely been 100 years since women have had the right to vote. And it's still bad because we still haven't included everybody else. This is a significant step forward, but it didn't guarantee equal access, especially for women, particularly women of color who faced barriers. And the other day I did a podcast on Is My Vote Private? And this is really important as a brief aside, but women often have been bullied with their votes. They've been bullied by their husbands, by the men in their lives, by limited access, by being told what they're supposed to do, by threat of violence. So the idea that the barriers to voting have been part of our history is something that's deeply disturbing. Just shouldn't be happening. So we keep going in time and the world continues to change. And we come up to the Civil Rights Movement of the 1960s and we get the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And this was really designed to prevent racial discrimination in voting. The Voting Rights Act was landmark. It finally began to dismantle a lot of the barriers that were preventing Black Americans and other people of color and marginalized groups from exercising their right to vote. And they call this the expansion of suffrage. Again, I hate that word, suffrage. Suffrage. RAGE. Yes, it's a weird word because it should say the expansion of voting rights, but it's changed the landscape and it has given us the ability to have more representation in our government. So they've abolished, so the right to vote was detached from property ownership. It was detached from the color of your skin. It was detached from your genitalia. It was detached from all those things and became a much broader political system. And we still are working on it today. So even though the human rights movement happened and we have the Voting Rights Act, it was there's a lot more we need to do to keep transforming our election process. So what we're going to look at tomorrow, because as we're going through this, I've tried to bring you up to Electoral College up to today, which means it's inclusive. The Electoral College has a distributed process for how it works. So what you get with your states is how you find out. Sorry, I'm not saying that well. Every state has a number of electors. We're going to talk about that tomorrow in more detail. This is all going to prepare us for the convention coming up. Every state has a number of electors. How those electors are calculated, how that representation works is today's current concerns around the Electoral College. But right now, giving you the history of the fight for a vote, I hope helps you understand why voting is such a privilege and it's something that is truly an American value and an American experience. I'm going to remind you again, make sure your voter registration is up to date and current and that they can see you on the rolls. And tomorrow, let's dig into today's Electoral College, what the issues are facing the institution itself and some of the ways it's been monkeyed with, because God knows in America, we always find the lawyers that can manage to monkey with things. Thank you for listening today. Thank you for supporting democracy. And I will talk to you tomorrow with more on the Electoral College. Thank you for listening to today's podcast. Make sure you subscribe and rate, and I'll be back with another episode really soon.